Hi. So my wife has just asked me to come up with a bit of a solution for our salt and pepper shakers. At the moment, they just kind of live wherever in the kitchen space. They find themselves on the kitchen table or where else. So we want to come up with a bit of a holder and somewhere so they can always go back to a bit of a home. Real simple build, but if you want to see what I got up to, then stick around and let's go. So welcome to the first small build of 2024. My wife has asked for a small holder for our kitchen bench. So I'll start by grabbing a piece of scrap Jarrah. I'll use the actual salt and pepper shakers themselves as the template for their circumference. And I'll grab the oil bottle to map out how wide it's going to be. I space them apart with about 30 millimeters in between each of the different items, and this will just keep it relatively small but also relatively aesthetic. And the oil bottle here is a pretty common shape for its size, so shouldn't be an issue if we need to buy a different brand. Once the mitre saw is set up, I'll use it to cut this piece to length. So overall it came out to about 300mm long, which is around about 12 inches. So the bottle and grinders will need somewhere to sit. Ordinarily you might use a force and a bit to cut a nice hole, and that would be it. I don't have a force and a bit that large, so the next best option will be to cut a shallow hole with a hole saw and then chisel out the waste. To start this, I'll use a center punch to create the locating points for the hole saw. I'll then use the hole saw to cut a shallow hole. How deep, you might ask? Well, I eyeballed this, so we're going to use a router later on to kind of router the center of these pieces out, and we'll get our common depth at that point. Now this specific hole saw kit is prone to burning, and it's got a really simple tooth design which I'm not really a fan of, so if anyone's got any ideas or suggestions of a great hole saw kit, please throw them in the comments. I'd love to see what's working for you. Okay, I then grabbed a couple of chisels and I grabbed a mallet, and it's time to start taking the wood left over after the saw. What I'll do is I'll chip these pieces out. I'll start with the shortest grain at the edge of the circle and then kind of chip backwards, slowly building away at the larger lengths of grain. The problem is if you kind of chip too big, you're likely to cut out too much waste material, and it's going to be harder to get a clean flat surface later on when you're using the router. So small bites and just take your time. As you chip closer to the center, you're probably going to struggle. This is where most strength is. This is where the longest pieces of grain are going to be. So there you might have to use some aggressive negotiations and really get underneath those to chip them out. And of course we'll repeat it on the opposite side to achieve two symmetrical holes for both of the salt and pepper grinders. And once the outer holes are roughly cleared, I'll use a small hole saw to repeat the process. This is because the oil bottle is both square and it's smaller than the grinder's circumferences, so we're going to use a different hole saw for this one. Now to create a flat and even surface. So I'm going to use a palm router with a 12mm straight bit to slowly create that surface. This is a process that I learnt when creating wine bottle holders. The bit doesn't have a bearing to ride on the exterior of the hole, so you have to be careful to make sure that you still maintain a nice even hole. However, because of the way a hole saw works, it does cut a bit of a trench, so you've got a bit of room for error. Chiseling will give a very jagged look on the base of whatever you're chiseling, and so using a router or some other method to clean up the surface at the end is one of the ways to provide a cleaner look. And as we said before, the center hole, the profile is going to need to be square, and at the moment, naturally, it's circular. So what we'll use is, once we've cleaned the bottom of that hole out, we'll use the router itself to kind of push into all four corners and take a little bit more of that material away, which will just lessen the load on the chisel later on when we're trying to clean it out and actually make it square. So once that's done, I'm going to use a square, and we'll basically mark out where we're going to chisel to create the square profile for the oil bottle holder. So once that's done, I'm going to put a chamfer bit into my palm router. What we're going to do next is we're going to put a chamfer on both the top side and the bottom side. This is to match an aesthetic that we've kind of already got going in our kitchen. We've got other bits and pieces that have that 45-degree chamfer on them. So we're just going to match that. You could essentially put any kind of detailing on the edges you want. You could leave it the way it is, but this is where we're going with this one. To begin the finish sanding process, I choose to sand a small chamfer into all of the detents, and this will aid in locating that hole when you're buzzing around the kitchen. The router doesn't have this option because of the depth of my chamfer bit, so we're going to use 80 grit sandpaper, and I'm going to wrap it around something solid, in this case a pencil, and get to work. So once that's done, I'll grab my Orbital sander. This one's a 125mm in diameter sander, so I'm going to use it to top and bottom sand and start working from 80 grit up to 240 grit to begin that finish sanding process. And I'll also use my multi-tool into some of the crevices on this piece. I used to not own a multi-tool, I wasn't really a fan of them, but on a recent job I bought one and I'm converted. If you're sitting on the fence, you don't know whether or not to buy one, I highly recommend it. They are super versatile and they can be very, very helpful on some of the finish sanding. And to finish up, we're going to use Gillies floor wax. You can find it at Bunnings. It's a soft wax and I use it on these builds where I want a matte finish, but I also want to be able to touch up that finish, as I'm sure this build's going to get wiped down periodically. It's in a splash zone, it's in the kitchen. You could probably use tung oil or a beeswax in the same regards, but I like this one. It has a bit of a darker finish to it as well, and it's somewhat cheaper. So you can continue to touch them off down the track. So you have it. I feel just simple designs like this are some of my favourite builds to make. You've just got a simple piece of timber, and very similar to another build I've made here, there's a holder for a towel rail. These are the designs that we use every single day and we really enjoy. And so, of course, if you're liking what you're seeing, stick around, check out some of the other videos. Like, subscribe, that always helps, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers.